Calling racist tropes and dehumanizing language the most unchristian thing that somebody could do sounds serious. No doubt about it. It sounds holy. Sounds like something that'll get applause in the right rooms, the nods from the right people. Sounds brave, but sounding brave and being biblical. Two different things entirely. Now, after a few decades of teaching, counseling, witnessing to, and flat out crying with roughly, probably close to 10,000 kids and families, here's what I can tell you with a straight face and a clear conscience. The things that actually shatter lives don't come from sharp tongues alone. They come from sharp knives. They come from fists, needles, bottles, beds that ain't safe, homes that aren't homes, murder, rape, child abuse, human trafficking, torture, adultery, family abandonment, domestic violence, alcoholism, drug addiction. Those aren't abstract sins, right? Those are the things that students write about when the lights are low and the journal's the only place that they're not pretending. And that's not me minimizing words. Scripture doesn't let us do that. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Proverbs 18:21. Jesus himself says, we'll give account for careless words. Matthew 12:36. Words matter. No argument there. But here's the problem. The Bible doesn't treat all sins as equal in consequence, damage, or judgment. That's a modern slogan, not a biblical one. Scripture makes distinctions, real ones, heavy ones. Jesus didn't reserve his strongest language for rude speech. He reserved it for hypocrisy, for religious leaders who knew better and chose image over truth. Woe to you scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites. It wasn't whispered. It was thundered repeatedly, publicly, with teeth, Matthew 23. He called them whitewashed tombs, clean on the outside, full of death on the inside. That wasn't name calling for sport. He was literally giving a diagnosis. And that's where this gets uncomfortable. Because I keep watching our politicians, our leaders, our pastors, our teachers, men who carry Bibles for a living, suddenly discover moral outrage the moment a certain name shows up on the ballot. Suddenly borders matter spiritually. Suddenly law enforcement becomes oppression. Suddenly enforcing existing law is unchristian, while ignoring it is compassion. It's funny how that urgency didn't show up on the last ballot, though. It's funny how Romans 13 didn't vanish under Obama or Biden, isn't it? Of course, now it needs to be explained away with footnotes and feelings. Look, let me be clear here. Paul didn't stutter when he wrote it. Let every person be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except for God. Rulers are not a terror to good conduct. They are a terror to bad. He goes on to say, Romans 13, 1-3, by the way. He goes on to say that the governing authority does not bear the sword in vain. That's law. That's enforcement. That's accountability. And Paul wrote that under Rome, not exactly a benevolent Christian republic. The same Bible that commands us to love also commands order. The same scripture that tells us to love the sojourner also tells us not to bear false witness. You don't get to quote Leviticus 19:34 and then quietly ignore Exodus 20:16. You don't get to demand compassion while practicing deception. That's where the hypocrisy starts to kind of sink in a little bit, right? Because if a pastor or a politician or a leader or a teacher starts repeating things like, let's say, a partial quote, where they strip a sentence of its context to score a moral point, that's not prophetic courage. That's not political leadership. That's manipulation. Trump's line about criminals crossing the border, or they're rapists, they're terrorists, it's quoted endlessly. What's conveniently omitted is the very next line, the very next breath, where he acknowledges that many good people are also coming across, right? You leave that out, it isn't clarification, it's deception. And deception, according to scripture, isn't a minor character flaw. It's something that God explicitly hates. There are 6 things that the Lord hates: a lying tongue, a false witness who breathes out lies, Proverbs 6:16-19. Not likes less, hates. And James piles on, whoever knows the right thing to do and they fail to do it, for him, that person is sin. That is sin. For that person, it's sin. James 4:17. Leaders don't get graded on a curve. Teachers are judged more strictly. James 3:1. That verse alone should terrify anybody who posts moral indictments online while trimming inconvenient facts. This is important, right? Now let's talk about the idea that enforcing the law must follow some pretty little picture, right? That we can have closed borders in theory, but not in practice. The laws are fine so as long as nobody ever really feels any discomfort. That's not biblical compassion. That's sentimentalism. Compassion without truth is just cowardice wearing perfume. In the Old Testament, God doesn't condemn Israel for having borders. He condemns them for unequal weights, for corruption, for favoritism, for enforcing the law for some, but not for others. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. Leviticus 19:15. And for those of you who've read the Bible, you know Leviticus. You got to be a man to get through that book. That verse wrecks both sides. You don't get to excuse law breaking because the story is sad. Let me rephrase that. Let me restate it, actually. You don't get to excuse law breaking because the story is sad. And you don't get to brutalize people because the law is on your side. Justice isn't soft, it's straight. And hypocrisy, selective outrage, is what God consistently brings the hammer down on. Isaiah 1, absolutely brutal. Hands lifted up in worship, full of blood. Prayers God refuses to hear because justice is ignored. Jesus echoes it again and again and again. Clean cups, rotten hearts. So when our leaders, our political leaders, our Christian leaders, our teachers, when they frame things like this, like enforcement itself as immoral, but only under one administration, that's not prophetic witness. That's partisan performance. And Scripture doesn't call that righteousness. It calls it leaven. What? Look it up. It's like heaven with an L. Look it up. It's a good word to know. Yes, kindness should always mark our speech. Absolutely. Right? Let your speech always be gracious. Colossians 4:6. But gracious doesn't mean dishonest. Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. 1 Corinthians 13:6. Love and truth are not competitors. They're wielded together. And here's the core issue. Scripture doesn't rank name-calling as the ultimate sin. It never has. The Bible reserves its strongest warnings for idolatry, replacing God with ideology, for blasphemy, misrepresenting God's character, for denying Christ, for leading others astray. Jesus said it would be better to have a millstone tied around your neck than to cause little ones to stumble. Matthew 18:6. Got a little caught up because that millstone also wants to throw you to the bottom of the water. That's not about tone. It's about direction. So when leaders flatten moral categories, when they elevate offensive language above sins that actually destroy bodies, souls, families, and generations, that ain't moral clarity. That's moral confusion. And confusion in the church never stays theological. It becomes generational. First Baptist Church, City United. Why? Woke. Words matter. They always have. But pretending they're the worst things we can do while minimizing deception, hypocrisy, lawlessness, and selective righteousness, that's a serious mistake. Scripture doesn't support it. History doesn't support it. And the kids writing in those journals definitely don't support it. This isn't about defending a president, my president, your president. This is about defending truth. This is about calling out politicians, teachers, Christian leaders, people that are the backbone of this country. It's about calling them back to the full counsel of God, not the parts that pull well. Because Christianity isn't a vibe. It's not a posture. It's not an Instagram ethic. It's submission to Christ, to truth, to reality, even when it goes against our tribe. It's not name calling. That's discipleship. And if that makes things awkward, good. The Bible's never meant to keep things comfortable. See you next time.